Cheers, everyone. I suppose I should preface this video by apologizing to a lot of my subscribers for another econ video. I realize that a lot of my subscriber base are probably not into economics and probably getting lost in a lot of things I'm saying. I promise I will get back to philosophy videos at some point, but for now I want to deal a final coup de grace to the debt-free money crowd. And I guess part of the reason for going after them is because it's a view that I used to hold myself, and for some reason I tend to hold the biggest grudge against views that I formerly held myself and then grew out of. So anyway, let's get to this. I first want to contest the whole idea that you can have debt-free money. Because, see, money, it isn't just about borrowing from banks. Money is inherently a debt, because money exists by virtue of taxation. Taxes are a debt imposed by government, and it is that debt which actually gives money its value. There's this false theory about the history of money that goes around. People think that people just barter goods, and when the one good becomes the most useful thing for bartering. But there have been several different goods that have been used for barter, but that doesn't really tell us the history of money. The history of money begins with government. The first monetary system we see in Sumeria was actually based on clay tablets, where they kept a tally of credits and debts. Basically, the thing to understand is that the reason that money circulates as something valuable, the reason it becomes agreed upon by all people that it has value, is because they know that their taxes are due, and the government demands taxes in that form of money. Anything the government demands in taxes will become money. If the government declared tomorrow that taxes can be paid in beaver pelts, well, I would fear for the future of beavers in this country. And that's also why hyperinflation involves the loss of the ability to pay tax, to collect taxes. In Zimbabwe, through war they lost about 80% of their productive capacity, so they weren't able to collect taxes from that tax base, and there's history. But speaking of inflation, I want to address the quantity theory of money, on which modern monetary theory, on which the debt-free money nonsense is based. Because really, actually, the debt-free money crowd is basically, they're not really as heterodox as I think they are. They're actually really extending the sort of Chicago school view of money to its logical extent, which is why people like Milton Friedman and Frank Knight and Irving Fisher supported similar ideas. But basically, here's the quantity theory of money basically sees inflation as too much money chasing too few goods. Here's how inflation actually works. You see, government, in the process of its spending, has to buy certain goods, and they choose to buy a fixed quantity of goods at the market price. So we have fixed quantity at a floating exchange rate. Well, when they do that, that basically bids up the price of the goods, and so it sends a market signal, and so that next year they have to buy the same goods at a higher price. So what the government can do instead is have just one commodity that they buy at a fixed rate, at a floating quantity. It's called a buffer stock, and it used to be what they did with gold. And that was, and there are many versions of the gold standard, but this was the version that was most effective. Was when government basically said, they're going to fix the price of gold. They said they're going to buy gold at so and so many ounces per dollar, or so many dollars. Sorry, $70 per ounce or something. And that set a fixed exchange rate for gold. and then so that meant that the market could sell gold to the government at that price, which then fixed the price at which gold sold on the open market, on the private market, and then the market valued other goods relative to gold and so then there was a stable price. Now, unless you think I'm defending the gold standard, and I guess I partially am, um, there are better commodities that could be used as a buffer stock. I mean, in our economy, basically, the more central a commodity is, the more the more central it is to commerce, the better it is as a buffer stock. So, I mean, oil would be a good buffer stock, except that we obviously need to be moving away from oil, for environmental reasons. But what modern monetary theory people tend to suggest is labor. The idea is that government offers, say, an $8 an hour job to anyone who's willing and able to work for that for them at that rate, and then basically it helps employ those who are currently unemployed, gives them a transition to other jobs in the private sector, and it also other jobs pay relative to that price. Other commodities are valued relative to that price, and so it achieves price stability as well as full employment. And so that's how buffer stock works. Now, as a Georgist, I think that land value taxation would actually help achieve full employment in the private sector. And so once we achieve that, then we might need something different as a buffer stock. But obviously, that'd be a nice problem to have, wouldn't it? But so that's obviously for future consideration. But anyway, so there's this criticism of government having to borrow money in order to pay, and so the debt-free money people buy into all this fear-mongering about the national debt. Here's the deal. Our so-called borrowing is actually just the sale of treasuries, and all treasuries is a savings account at the Fed. So, just like you have your savings account in your own bank, and you earn interest on that, it's the same thing when you buy treasury bonds. It's just, the Fed might pay a higher interest rate, and just like with your local bank, it's just a matter of deducting numbers from one column and adding numbers to another. It's just basic accounting principles, and so there's no big crisis with the national debt. It's just a matter of moving numbers from one column to another. Now, that said, there is a rather novel proposal put forward by Randall Wray, a modern monetary theorist, who suggested that government issued non-marketable, non-bond, non-treasury warrant backed by the full faith and credit to the U.S., issued that to the Fed as an asset, which then will allow the Fed to credit the Treasury's deposit account for however much the federal government says that asset is worth. As that will allow the government to basically spend without having to sell Treasury bonds on the market. So obviously it'd be simpler if they just issue the money directly. So I sort of agree with that proposal of the debt-free money people, but it's just not the crisis that they make it out to be. It's really a crisis of people misunderstanding how the monetary system works. Now, where I do differ from them much more markedly is on their stance towards banks. They think that it's a crime that banks should be able to create money out of nothing, as they say. Well, let me sort of throw water on that. Banks they aren't creating money out of nothing. They're actually converting assets into liquidity. They hold capital assets that people put up. That's a requirement for them to make a loan. Unlike with your debt to the government in the form of taxes, the debt that banks have upon you is voluntary. You choose to take on the debt with knowing that you'll have to pay it back at interest, and people do that because it's worth it to them. There's entrepreneurs who need business loans in order to get their business started, and they expect to pay it back, with the money that business generates. And people take on car loans because they have the money they have enough income to pay it back. you know, obviously they don't have the money up front to buy the car, but they have the flow of income. It's just that's another thing. You know, they confuse stocks with flows. There's people who have, and you know, when you have a flow of income, then that allows you to have the money at any one time to pay back a loan incrementally. So I mean, with banks, you know, some people don't realize that banks used to issue their own currency. There used to be a time under the gold standard when basically people would deposit gold into their bank vault, and then the bank would issue its own banknotes. Now, this really is, I mean, in principle, when you think about it, it's really no different from, you know, a store issuing coupons or whatever. I mean, you basically you own something, and you're basically saying this is redeemable for this other thing. You know, and so since the banks themselves are creating their own coupons, basically, I mean, what is stopping from that? And people found as long as those coupons, you know, banknotes, were redeemable in the thing they deposited, then there was no need to worry, and most people didn't even go back for their deposits because the banknotes themselves circulate as currency. Why? Because just like with the money that the government issues, it was payable. It was payable on debts incurred. And so there were clearinghouses that would exchange banknotes from different banks. And so having a uniform fiat currency helps provide a uniform standard that, you know, gets rid of the middleman and abolishes the need for those clearinghouses. But, you know, other than that, banks still do what they did before. They're still issuing credit on assets that they hold. And they do it because there is a market demand for credit. And so, you know, let's say, well, what about the problem of interest? You know, there's this theory that interest is supposedly unrepayable because the banks create the principal for the loan, but not the interest. Well, this is nonsense because it would only hold true if the loan was all owed immediately in full. Which defeats the whole purpose of a loan. The whole purpose of a loan is you owe it back over time. And when you take in the time factor, then you have an inflow of new loans and outflow of payments, so that over time, you know, there needn't be any fluctuation, any increase in the debt to GDP ratio from year to year, just as long as there's enough of the new inflow of loans to pay off the loans from that one is paying back incrementally. Now, as for the cause of interest, that's for another video, which I hope to get into. But you know, hopefully, this should at least show that there is no problem of interest as it is usually framed. But what about speculation? I heard a lecture recently from Herman Daly, where he basically his reason for supporting a debt-free money system where we take away the banker's privilege to create credit is based on the idea that it would stop banks from being able to speculate in the market and therefore, you know, sort of tie their hands from bidding up asset prices. And this is nonsense because it doesn't tell banks what they can spend the money on. So it could be that they'll simply spend on speculative things while preventing money from going to the proper channels. And so government can either just let the legitimate needs of the economy just deteriorate, or create new money which the banks can use for further speculation. So the problem is not the bank's issue of credit, it's what they're issuing credit on. It's, you know, the problem is illiquid assets such as land and fixed capital. So I mean, the short-term fix to that is qualitative regulation as opposed to quantitative, by having the banks only take in liquid assets as per Adam Smith's real bills doctrine. then that helps keep liquidity flowing through the economy and doesn't tie up capital into into these speculative assets. And of course, the long-term fix is to tax land and other natural resource that yield these rents, and which will then also prevent the long-term the incentive to tie up the lending into fixed capital, which has a long-term turnover rate, and will instead lead to banks lending on short-term liquid capital and lead to more financial stability. So that's about it for now. I'll try to tie the ends together by making an econ video where I try to explain my sort of long-term vision for the economy. But apart from that, I do promise to get back to philosophy, and I think I'm doing a few sociology videos from now on too. Anyway, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed. Peace.